Hello, my name is Jonathan Orsini. Today I'm going to introduce a conceptual model that connects mentoring and teamwork. This presentation will be heavily theory focused, which I know isn't always exciting for everyone, so I'll try to keep this under the 20-minute time limit. I do wish I was there in person so we could discuss some of these ideas and how they fit together, but hopefully I'll hear from some of you after the conference if you're interested. So I'm going to start with a review of mentoring and teamwork theory, introduce the conceptual design in detail, and then discuss areas for future research. So the first thing I need to say about mentoring is that the context in which it occurs is pivotal in understanding an operationalized definition. For the purposes of this discussion, I will be focusing on mentoring in an academic context. Given that the definition I like is a personal and reciprocal relationship in which a more experienced faculty member acts as a guide, role model, teacher, and sponsor of a less experienced student. The mentor provides the mentee with knowledge, advice, counsel, challenge, and support in the mentee's pursuit of becoming a full member of a particular profession. So I know that sort of like keeps our conversation like focused on academia, but again, because mentoring is just so context specific, you really can't just have one definition that necessarily meets the needs of all, all different contexts. So although the definition can change a lot based on context, there are two parts of mentoring theory that have been agreed upon by scholars, across contexts since it was published in the 1980s, and that's that there are certain career and psychosocial functions that mentors must provide to mentees across contexts, and that the nature of a mentoring relationship can change over time, and it does change through phases, which are listed here. The behaviors stay relatively the same, but their frequency and effectiveness can change based on the phase of relationships. You can see here the mentoring functions. You have career functions and psychosocial functions, and there are four phases: the initiation phase, the cultivation phase, the separation phase, and the redefinition phase. For the sake of time, I'm going to move forward. Feel free to pause this later if you actually want to read some of those in more detail. So mentoring relationships are developmental relationships that should not be considered static, but should be thought of as existing on a continuum. The mentoring relationship continuum, which I posted here, is a model that makes this very easy for people to visualize, in my opinion. The MRC proposes that all developmental relationships may be placed on a continuum and can be defined by degree of engagement and the deliberate fulfillment of specific mentoring functions. So as relationships move along the continuum, they can become more active and reciprocal, and mentors can provide more career and psychosocial support and become more intentional in promoting professional development and the success of their mentees. So relational mentoring here on the far right involves high levels of collaboration, greater reciprocation, interdependence, a strong working alliance that includes rapport, apprenticeship, and identification, and should also ideally be inspirational, motivational, and transformational. The slanted lines represent growth-fostering interactions. Growth-fostering interactions are characterized by mutual empathy, authenticity, and empowerment. So the more relational mentoring that you see in these developmental relationships, the more you should see growth-fostering interactions take place. Now, the more growth-fostering interactions take place, the more relational the mentoring becomes, and this is a cycle of inputs and outputs that I think it's important to note that even though the literature on this topic doesn't specifically point that out, essentially relational mentoring can be distinguished by identifiable emergent states, okay? Remember that word, emergent states, which include greater career development outcomes, improved quality of life, fluid exchange between expert and learner roles by both parties, a two-way reciprocal relationships, and increased vulnerability, intimacy, and commitment. So this type of strong social cohesion is referred to in this model as companionate love, and it is typical of the most satisfactory and long-term mentoring relationships. Okay. So Johnson's model of triangular mentoring is one of my favorite ways to conceptualize the different parts of effective mentoring. Essentially, the model says that there are three pieces to effective mentoring, which are relational abilities, relatively stable virtues, and then functional behaviors and competencies. The nice thing about this model is that if you're weak in any one area, you can make up for that by being stronger in others, which I think is just very appealing as people want to learn to be better mentors. For the purposes of this conceptual model, we are focusing today okay, there we go, sorry. We're focusing today on the competencies and specifically the mentoring functions. So Johnson described 18 specific behaviors, which I will not list here, but each of these behaviors have been also identified in other research as being critical to effective mentoring, especially in an academic context. I think it is important to say again that effective behaviors in other sectors may be slightly different, which is one reason why this subject has been difficult from a theory perspective, because it's hard to have a unifying theory when context is so influential on behaviors and outcomes. It is our hope to demonstrate later in this presentation that the competencies Johnson describes that are described in other mentoring literature line up with effective teamwork behaviors. But before we go there, we're going to talk a little bit more about teamwork theory now. So, okay, there are a few basic assumptions that we need to understand about teamwork. First, a team is at least two individuals who work interdependently on tasks, share responsibility outcomes, self-identify, or select others to act as a social entity rooted in a larger organization. So effective teams must engage in effective task work and teamwork. So task work is the execution of activities required for teams to accomplish their shared goals, And teamwork is the specific behaviors, attitudes, and cognitions that each member of the team must have in order for the team to be successful. The last really important point here is that essential task work can't replace effective teamwork, and we'll discuss this more in a couple of slides. Essentially, the social component of teams is the most important criteria for success. Okay. So recent teamwork literature has suggested that temporal models of teamwork processes are best at understanding how these things work together. So first, a few definitions. I mentioned before this concept of emergent states in mentoring theory. I use that language on purpose because although mentoring doesn't specifically identify emergent states, those characteristics are extremely similar to emergent states in teamwork. So I thought it was worth saying that. Emergent states are the results of team behavioral experiences and serve as inputs for future team outcomes. You can see here in this rhythm of team task accomplishment, there are inputs, I, processes, P, and outputs, O. Inputs influence teamwork processes and change future emergent states, which are outcomes. Okay, and those emergent states eventually become new inputs to future team processes. So emergent states describe cognitive, motivational, affective states of teams that can be both considered team inputs and outcomes. Emergent states do not represent team interaction, but are products of team experiences. They do not describe the nature of member interaction, only the ramifications of those interactions. So emergent states can vary frequently, like situational awareness, whereas things like cohesion can be changed a lot early in team formation, but are hard to change in teams with a long history. It is important to distinguish emergent states from team processes, which are the vehicles that transform emergent states into other emergent states and other more distant outcomes. Teamwork processes describe interdependent team activities that orchestrate task work in employees' pursuit of goals. So according to this model, teamwork processes can be grouped into 3 phases, which include action, transition, and interpersonal phases. So action phases are where teams engage in behaviors that lead to goal accomplishment. Transition phases are phases where teams evaluate performance, conduct planning, and change goals for mission accomplishment. And then there are interpersonal phases, which typically occur at the same time as transition and action phases, and they are necessary for the maintenance of relationships during action and transition phases. So considering teamwork processes' impact on emergent states and team success is extremely important in teams looking to create new knowledge, and is especially relevant in academia. That is why it's important to now discuss the model of integrative capacity. So integration is defined as the extent to which a team combines its distinct expertise and work into a unified whole. So a team's integrative capacity then is the capability that is sustained through an interactive system linking social, psychological, and cognitive processes. So researchers who have proposed integrative capacity suggest a temporal viewpoint for teamwork processes and argue that knowledge and social integration co-evolve through the continuous creation and evolution of emergent states. So the potential result of this process is the transformation of the team's different abilities into a new knowledge product. So researchers have suggested that integrative capacity enables teams to overcome compositional, team process, and contextual barriers that inhibit their ability to generate new knowledge products. So to be clear, the key takeaway from integrative capacity is that knowledge creation is impossible without effective social integration processes, which include effective teamwork processes that lead to positive emergent states. So the whole integrative capacity model is a cycle, and successful knowledge integration helps to reinforce positive teamwork processes and behaviors and bolstering emergent states. One last point, and although I don't list them here, teamwork theory suggests that teams move through stages of group development as well. So research suggests that it takes about 6 months at minimum to achieve the highest stages of group development, which includes high levels of task cohesion and psychological safety, and mutual, and then co-construction, shared mental models, constructive conflict, things like that. So knowledge integration is only possible when teams achieve these higher stages of group development. Okay, so now it's time to cross the streams. I was always a big fan of the Ghostbusters. Don't cross the streams, right? Okay, so teamwork and mentoring have a lot in common. They both require similar processes. They both progress through stages of development. Both involve inputs and temporal models that lead to more permanent group outcomes. And both require trust, mutuality, and the development of shared mental models and cognitions that have specific antecedent behaviors. And knowledge integration in many cases is the ideal outcome of both mentoring and teamwork relationships, especially in academia. I can also argue that mentoring relationships can be taxonomically classified as a type of team with high authority and skill differentiation, but we'll not discuss that in much detail here today because of time constraints. I put this really busy slide up only briefly just to let people know how this process works specifically. So what we wanted to show in this model is that there's overlap between effective teamwork processes and effective mentoring processes. So we took the teamwork processes from an instrument developed by researchers in 2018 using the temporal model of teamwork discussed previously, and we used the mentoring competency assessment to distinguish mentoring behaviors. These behaviors line up with functional mentoring competencies that Johnson discussed previously, but we used this list because it was part of a tested instrument with high face validity. The citations are below. Feel free to pause the screen and go and review this in more detail a little bit later. So after taking the time to analyze these behaviors and review their definitions in detail, we made the following table, which seeks to demonstrate how we believe these behaviors overlap. So promoting professional development is on the left as perhaps the only competency that is unique to mentoring relationships, although I could see arguments for being included in effective teamwork processes. Monitoring progress towards goals was included in the teamwork competencies only list, but I could see arguments being made for it to be included along with mentoring competencies such as aligning expectations or maintaining effective communication. But I didn't feel like it was specifically necessary for mentoring. So that's one of the things that we're going for. We only included topics in the combined competency list if we thought they could be specifically tied and necessarily tied to both mentoring and teamwork. And so monitoring progress towards goals wasn't necessarily absolutely required for mentoring. Promoting professional development wasn't absolutely necessary for teamwork. The rest of the combined competencies are listed in the middle of the figure. Many teamwork behaviors lined up with maintaining effective communication, which makes sense as communication is critical in these group processes. Aligning expectations pretty much covered mission analysis and goal specification, and strategy formulation and situation monitoring tied in closely with assessing understanding. Fostering independence was spot on with motivating and confidence building, and although there was not a specific teamwork process tied to addressing diversity, we felt that it was obviously important in both mentoring and teamwork scenarios. So given that, we felt that it was fair for us to include all of these behaviors as important social processes necessary in the creation of emergent states in both constructs. So in this model, we see that these processes all lead to similar emergent states. So maintaining effective communication and affect management are both going to increase trust and could increase cohesion and team identity and things like that. So yeah, I think in these groups, positive emergent states can further the growth of the stages of team development, and they simultaneously impact the strength of mentoring relationships in the same magnitude and direction. So, for example, if you have a mentoring or teamwork, if you have one of these processes, and you have a positive experience that creates positive emergent states, not only if it's going to be a positive emergent state, not only would it strengthen the stage of group development, but it would strengthen the mentoring relationship as well. So we anticipate that those relationships would grow in magnitude and direction at the same rate. The cycle continues until teams are capable of cognitive integration, which remember we saw in integrative capacity, which is the last step of the integrative capacity cycle. And so once teams can achieve knowledge outcomes successfully, this further strengthens the evolving mentoring and team relationships by promoting higher stages of group or mentoring development. The point is that effective behaviors and teamwork processes have similar impact on emergent states as effective mentoring processes. And the overlap here suggests that one conceptual model can exist to explain effective teamwork and mentoring outcomes. So I think if we can accept the foundation that this model is placed on, I think there are a lot of areas for future research here. I think the first important thing, which is something that I'm going to be trying to do as a part of my dissertation, is identify the specific overlap between mentoring and teamwork competencies. And I think that's definitely something that we need to do so we can sort of agree what goes in that first box for the necessary social processes that improve teamwork and mentoring outcomes. I think the other thing we need to do is come up with a typology of mentoring relationships. So teamwork has a lot of research where they've already created team taxonomies based on the types of teams, the behaviors of those teams, what those teams have to accomplish. So there's a number of different ways that you can identify teams that way. And I think it's important for us to start doing that with mentoring relationships as well. And I think research needs to go into that. I think it's also important for us to see how ineffective teamwork behaviors prevent mentoring relationships from becoming more transformational if you think about that mentoring relationship continuum. And that's especially important in academic settings where that mentoring relationship is so important to like student and faculty development, honestly, for both students and faculty. So I think it's really important to identify what teamwork behaviors are important in mentoring relationships. And I think the opposite is true. It's important for us to understand how ineffective mentoring behaviors can inhibit action transition, and interpersonal phases of teamwork. I think that's important within mentoring relationships. I think it's important in teams that these people participate in that are, tangentially tied to the mentoring relationship. Like, this is really important for interdisciplinary science teams and the science of team science. I think it's also important for us to look at how larger teams, like supervisory committees or science teams, are impacted by ineffective mentoring. And I think it's important for us to understand how effective mentoring relationships can be impacted by larger ineffective teamwork on larger teams. So I want to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to this presentation about this new conceptual model. I would really like to hear people's thoughts on it, especially because I plan on, we're going to be collecting data soon to actually explore this as for my dissertation. So I think the more people I talk to about it, better. I also think that there is legitimately some overlap here, and when you consider that all the responsibility that faculty have in an academic setting when it comes to training graduate students, I think, so they get so little time devoted to professional development. So if we could actually find, proof that this conceptual model is accurate, and that there's certain skills that faculty need to be effective in that would make them far more effective in teams and in mentoring relationships, I think that would be beneficial, certainly for students, definitely for faculty, and really for all of academia. So with that, I'll say thank you. I'm sorry I probably won't do an interpretive dance right now, so I guess that means you guys are going to have a lot of questions. But anyway, thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and please contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.